and Dragons is a real serious problem. I began to look through the instruction manual, and I see here how to cast magical spells and mage spells and cleric spells. And you go to the pages that it's listed on, in this instance page 41, and they have complete descriptions of how to cast spells and how to contact powerful spirits and how to use these spirits and these powers to overcome, obviously, evil or good. Here it says, it is important to remember that the source of all magic is the life force of the user. This is the teaching of the occult. This is exactly what we were introduced into in Star Wars and E.T., that there is some magical power, some life force that runs throughout the universe.
You have eyewitnesses. For instance, one case, the parents saw their child summon Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself.
Oh, I remember this craze in the 80s. I remember it so vividly. Not that I ever participated in the whole Dungeons and Dragons things. I did watch the cartoon. But I remember pastors giving sermons talking about how Dungeons and Dragons was a tool of the devil, and saying some of the exact same things that this gentleman was saying about it being something that people learning to cast spells and that it was evil and things of that nature. And because of my curiosities and because I wasn't afraid to ask questions as a youth, I remember asking one particular pastor, I said something to the effects of, Dungeons and Dragons cast spells in order to defeat evil, right? Like, that's what the whole cartoon displays, and so that's what's going on. Isn't that the same thing that happens in your Bible when you're casting out demons, when Jesus came to cast out demons? That he's summoning a force, and that force is casting out demons. Is that not the same thing that when in Isaiah, an angel comes down to fight the Prince of Persia? No, that's in Daniel. Came down to fight the Prince of Persia. That these angels are summoned. Or in Hezekiah, which I'll talk about in a later video, where an angel comes and supposedly kills 185,000 troops, Assyrian troops. But you're calling forth these entities to fight your enemies. It's the same thing. But of course they went to, well, it's the source. The source. And as this man said in this video, the belief that there is a universal energy that flows through everyone and everything. One of the same things that came from Star Wars with the, the force and the good side of the force and the light side and the dark side of the force, which that would be a whole thing about Kabbalah, really. That's another video itself. We'll do that video later. But as far as this universal force that flows through anything and everything, is that not the same that this God created everything from itself, out of itself, and that everything is part of this God? Is that not the same as a universal force that flows through everything? Is not everything created by your God? Therefore, there is the same. And I remember also stating to him that if there is a force of good and there is a force of evil, i.e. the devil, and if a person chooses to use that force of God or the force of the devil, is that not the user's energy determining where and what that force is used for and where it's coming from? Is that not the exact same thing? But because it's coming from your God, you see it as different. You see it as evil. And I reminded him, I say, you have often talked about how your ancestors, your grandmother, would use formulas that she would concoct, that she learned from her ancestors, and going back to where they learned these things of how to use these plants and medicines and prayers and meditations from their African roots. You've just transformed those same ones to fit your Christian dynamics, but it is yet still the same, and you still talk about it. You still talk about people putting roots on people. It is not, it's the same thing. And your God casting, in Isaiah, condemning people with prophecies of what's going to happen to them and all these sorts of things, is still casting a spell. And the book of Psalms is filled with spells that are being cast. But because it's coming from your God that you believe in, then it's a good thing. Does not the Muslim or the Jew or or the Indus, or anybody else view it the same way. That because the those who family members are indigenous to America, indigenous to Africa, whether they are the indigenous Norse or anybody else, they all cast spells calling down for their entity to help them in battle, to heal them from their sicknesses, to protect their crops and their fields. This is a system that has been in place for as long as man has been recording our more modern history of calling and praising Rene-Nutet to keep the crops of the fields in Egypt is no different from a Christian praying that their crop comes in. There really is no difference whatsoever other than who you decide the source is. And that just shows the bias that fits into these religions, that they are claiming their source is the real source, the good source, and everybody else's source is the wrong source and the evil source. But at the end of the day, it is all based on the user as to whether they determine it's good or bad, and then how it is used. What was it in Harlem Nights when she bury your drawers in the yard and you can't leave the house? Those kinds of things is what is all about the user and their intent. And when people ask me questions about magic and do I believe in magic, I don't believe in magic. I believe in energy, and I believe in cause and effect, and you can manipulate energy based on cause and effect, and that cause and effect is based on your willpower. So your mental energy and willpower and your activity determines what happens. And whether or not a person believes it or not, that determines what happens. One of the wisest things that my grandmother ever told me, she told me that roots don't work unless you believe in it. If somebody tries to, and she told me this, if somebody ever tries to put a curse on you, only if you believe that they can put a curse on you, can a curse be put on you. And my entire life, I've followed that. And I can recognize that everything negative that's happened in my life, for the most part, was a decision that I made. There are the occasions where somebody else made a decision and I was just the effect of it. Like when New Horizons decided to sell and a new family came in and they replaced me with their nepotism of a nephew. Or when Solid Computer Decision overreached and expanded too quickly and then closed their doors and without me getting paid for 2 pay periods. That was beyond my will. That was someone else's will. But my will had me saving my money so that I wasn't caught in a destitute situation. So therefore, as with everything, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.